Now with the vaccine being distributed, with the caseload looking like it's flattening out and getting less, deaths are down, we're starting to now pivot into some topics to help prepare business owners for life after this pandemic is over. It is coming. So we want to be in a position of getting out in front of this versus reacting to it. So we've got a lot of great content. Tom Garrity, managing partner at Compass Point Consulting, will really be the anchor of the content we're going to have today. But we wanted to make sure between myself, Reggie Reiter, commercial lines team leader here at Univest, and then also Greg Blemlick, who is our practice leader on the benefits side, that we did have an insurance piece of this too, because part of planning in the post-pandemic, getting back to the normal, is also making sure that your insurance program and your strategies are also aligning to support that growth. So with that being said, we'll go ahead and jump in. Couple of housekeeping items. So just a heads up, everybody, this presentation is being recorded, and we will be distributing a copy of the recording after the webinar is over. And then the second piece is there should be a Q&A box on the right-hand side of your screen. So we will be taking questions throughout this through the Q&A box. Just type those in. And we baked in some time at the end to answer questions between the three of us. So our disclaimer slide, just an important reminder about today's session. We are giving our professional opinions. Things can change really quickly in this world. I'm not going to read this through to everybody, but I think you kind of get the gist. So with that being said, I want to pass the baton over to Tom and let him get into his content. Tom, take it away.
Very good. Thank you, Reggie. I'll let you click through to our first slide. Yeah, so thank you all for being here, as Reggie said, and we want to talk today about building value in your company's future in a post-pandemic environment. As to Reggie's point, we are definitely coming out. We know the vaccines are out in the marketplace. Our clientele, which is probably about 50 or 60, mostly family businesses, privately held companies that we're working with, are active, very, very robust in terms of how they see and what's already happening this year. So we're going to talk about some of the things that we're seeing those companies do and some of our suggestions on how to make sure your company's prepared and not just waiting, but actually what are you going to do following this webinar and start implementing into your business. Next. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time when we talked about this, we talked about, being agile in your growth. And we see these 7 attributes as sort of the placeholders for agile growth. Everything starts with the leadership team. I often say the company can't outgrow the leadership team. I've never met a company that outgrew its leadership team. I'm pretty sure I never will meet a company that will outgrow its leadership team. As the leadership team goes, so goes the company. So getting that leadership right and continually developing that leadership team is critical to success and to scaling up your business. Of course, strategy, where are we? Where do we want to go? We've got a whole process in there. I'm sure many of you on the call have hopefully some sort of plan in place, and we'll speak to that a little bit here and certainly can speak to it more following the webinar. Talent, of course, not just that we've got people in positions, but that we've got the right people. I'm going to spend a little bit of time at the end of the webinar talking about a couple tools that we use that may help you in terms of fine-tuning your talent. Of course, everything comes down to execution. We can have great plans, we can have the right talent, but if we don't execute, it's just a nice plan sitting on the shelf. So that's a key piece to agile growth. Customer focus, really the concept there is around core customer. Who is your core customer? Not everybody's your core customer. Not all revenue is good. And so getting clarity around that core customer and a focus on how do we speak to them and in a manner that they can hear us is really key to, again, good to agile growth. 6, of course, we're driving towards profitability. We're not just doing this for laughs. So it's growing revenue, but more importantly, growing the bottom line with it and making sure, and of course, generating cash, converting that profit into cash. And then finally, Agile growth really, especially as you're scaling, requires systems. If everything keeps falling back on a select few or on the owner only to figure out what we do and how we do it, and that person or those few people have all of the knowledge between their ears, that company is really hard to scale. At some point, it's going to stall out. So these are 7 attributes. We'll share this deck with you for back. I think this is important to on a couple of, one is, first of all, this represents how many businesses, registered businesses there are in the United States, 28 million. And as you look at this graph, what's surprising to most people, and it certainly was to me the first time I saw this, is that only 4% of 28 million businesses make it over $1 million in revenue annually. It means 96% of the businesses out there are doing less than $1 million. Everybody thinks everybody's a big business, but they're not. The marketplace is dominated by Main Street, small lifestyle businesses, and there's nothing wrong with them. But the point of this slide is it's hard to grow. It's hard to scale. And then we call these valleys of death as we're going, less than $1 million to $1 million, and then $1 million to 10 million, and then 10 million to 50 million. Only 17,000 businesses out of that 28 million make it over 50 million. So I'll just ask you and have you think about, what do you think some of these valleys of death are? Between 1 million and 10 million. What's potentially a valley of death? What might happen that the company stalls out? You should be thinking of things like cash. We could outgrow our cash. Maybe we really don't have as clever of an idea as we think we do. The market really doesn't care. We haven't figured out how to communicate to the market. We don't market well. We haven't got a sales group. Just a number of issues on building a company that can scale and grow. So I think it's just good to have in perspective. You're over $1 million, thumbs up. You're among 4%. You're over 10.4% make it over 10 million. And again, a mere 17,000 over 50 million. Next. So where do we start? We have this in our office. I love this poster, and not so much because it's one of these what's the term I want to use? One of these classic make you feel good posters. But this is about mindset, and I'll read this real quick. Every morning in Africa, a gazelle wakes up. It knows it must run faster than the fastest lion, or it will be killed. Every morning a lion wakes up. It knows it must outrun the slowest gazelle, or it will starve to death. It doesn't matter whether you're a lion or a gazelle. When the sun comes up, you better be running. I'd ask you to think for a second. What does that mean to you? And the real message there is growth is a mindset. When you get out of bed, a mindset of growth. And I don't mean you just have to have like, oh, we're going to be twice the size, or we've got some big revenue game. But growth, if you stop growing, if you start coasting, it's like this slide. These guys are coasting. The only way they can continue to coast is be on a decline. And that's what happens in business as well, that you begin to stop innovating. You're not as aggressive in going out and trying to grow a market or grow a new market or bring new products. And go ahead, you can go to the next slide. And suddenly you're coasting, but you don't notice it right away. That's the dangerous thing. You don't notice you're coasting. You don't notice until you lose a key account. You don't notice until a customer walks and you go, what happened? And they say you stop paying attention, or they don't tell you, they just leave. So this mindset of growth, when you get up in the morning, you better be running. And if you think like that, I'm telling you, things that are happening throughout the day, you're going to notice and see them because you got a mindset of growth. You're going to see opportunities. You're going to see relationships. You're going to see partnerships that are there now, but because you get a mindset of, okay, where's our next opportunity? Who could I connect with? You're just going to see them more often. So next slide. This is the feel-good slide, and it really is. Look what's going to go on here. Here's the economic pundits. Now, of course, all this has to happen, but we all know what happened in 2020. It was brutal. If you're on this webinar, you made it, so congratulations. But look at the growth projected here in 21 and 22. This is impressive growth. This is a worldwide economic, so we're not just looking at the States. Actually, in the US, they're projecting a little bit higher GDP growth. If we're at about 2 or 3% GDP growth, that's a good, robust economy. We're talking about 5 and 6s here, and even 7s in the US. So the message here is, unless we have something catastrophic happen, we're going to have a very robust economy as we break out of this pandemic, and it's already happening. And so again, I'm going to share some things with you today that hopefully get you in that growth mindset of, okay, how do we capture this wave that's in front of us? Next. I can't take credit for this saying. This is any of you history buffs. This is a Winston Churchill quote: "Never let a good crisis go to waste." But boy, do I believe that. Never let a good crisis go to waste, whether it's in your families or it's at work or in your personal life. The baddest things that can happen, there's lessons to be learned. And so let's look back real quickly on what were some of the lessons, anyway, that we learned out of this crisis. What is the date? It's 25th. So we shut down on the 17th in Pennsylvania, if you remember, is when Wolf shut down the state last year. And I think for most of us, it was shock, it was numbness. And I don't know about any of you guys, but my anxiety was as high as it could get. I didn't know how we were going to do business. Our business, like so many of you on this call or on this webinar, is so in person. And we weren't doing any of the Zoom or the WebEx or any of the tools other than just occasionally maybe making a connection with somebody, but we certainly weren't working with clients that way. But we figured it out. But to start, shock, numbness, and anxiety. I think the second thing, as I kind of look back and have talked to our customers, is we began to absorb information, and I call it the reality check, and start to confront the brutal facts. What's happening? What are we learning? What's happening with our customers? How are we going to create value for them? They've got the same thing going on that we do. How do we help them? And what can we do and what can't we do? And so I would say that's probably the second and third week, coming out of the back end of March and into April of last year, of figuring out what's going to be the next steps. The other thing, I think any company that was successful figured out quickly how to start communicating with their team way more frequently than they did before. And my message to you is, don't stop that. You figured out a methodology of how to communicate in a meaningful way with people and with your organization. That's all about getting people on the same page. It's about alignment. It's about transparency. When people know what's going on, when they know where the company is headed, first of all, you can't play on a team and help it win if you don't know what you're trying to accomplish, right? If we don't know what the scoreboard looks like, if we don't know what winning looks like, all I can do is give you my best, maybe. So communicating to the team was critical, not just in where we're going, but of course, helping people settle their jets. I mean, again, go back a year, none of us knew what was going to happen. I mean, I didn't even know if I'd left the house at this point to just go on a walk in the neighborhood. And it's kind of bizarre to think how crazy it was just a year ago. And then we began to plan, right? Strategically began to plan. I think everybody had to figure out some sort of business model innovation. For us, we went all virtual. We happened to pick the Zoom platform, but we reached out to all of our clients where we typically would meet with clients on a monthly basis. We started meeting initially on a weekly basis, shorter meetings, getting their leadership teams together, revising the strategy, whatever that we had in place prior to the pandemic, what we needed to do now, how we were going to talk to customers, or how they were, what was the market plan. Most of our, well, I shouldn't say most, many of our clients went virtual, but we have a number of manufacturing clients, and there's no virtual business in manufacturing. So those guys began to come back to work in the May and June timeframe. And of course, they had to develop the back to work plans, safety, mental health, whether it was back to work at the plant or it was virtual. That's a big issue, continues to be a big issue. And again, a communication and a rhythm that people knew they could count on hearing from the company. And then back to the leadership team. As the leadership team goes, so goes the company. Getting that team to meet regularly, daily huddles, weekly 1-hour meetings, monthly bigger meetings. Where are we at strategically? What are we going to do the next 30 days? And course correct accordingly. So Again, not letting a good crisis go to waste. What did we learn? Because, go to the next slide, we're going to have it again. I'm 60 years old, and I remember when I first started in the workplace, and I would hear about, oh, we're going to have another recession, and I'd be like, how are we going to have another recession? Everything's fine. Well, we are. We're going to have another recession. We're going to have another crisis, and we're going to have another and another, guaranteed. That's just life. You often say, we go to bed at night after, a whole chaotic day, and we think, okay, I got everything in its place, everything's settled down. And in our minds, many of us think somehow we're going to wake up in the morning and it's all going to be okay. And that is not the case. All we need to do is get out of bed and things start not going the way we thought they were going to go. It's just life. And then we can have these catastrophic events. And we talk about these 5 Ds, and I know there's some business owners on this call and or on this webinar, and whether you're a business owner or not, you're in the leadership team or you're somewhere else in the organization, it's important to know this. These 5 Ds, 50% of all business transitions are not voluntary, and they happen under one of these 5 Ds. Of course, the big one is death, and could have death of course, the owner or a key partner in the business, but also it could be a spouse or it could be somebody else in the family that causes so much disarray in the business that it loses its focus, it loses the energy, whatever. So death can be a significant, obviously, a big significant impact, and it doesn't have to just be the owner. Disability is more likely to happen than not. And, Reggie alluded to earlier, talking about insurance, we're all about life insurance, but disability insurance is so important. It's way more likely to happen than death. That we're going to become disabled, and disabled could be, a health issue, not just sort of the classic disability we think of, like I hurt my leg or something like that, which clearly could be a significant disability. But death, disability, divorce can create all sorts of havoc in these private companies, especially in a family business. Distress, that's what we just came out of, economic distress. We could have a key customer leave us if we haven't run our business well and we have a big customer concentration, and I don't know, 75, 80% of our business is tied up in one customer and we lose them. Boom, we're going to get backed into a corner that maybe we can't get out of. And then disagreement. And we could have major disagreement with partners, major disagreement inside the family, could even with some other stakeholders, with a bank or other key stakeholder in the business. So important to recognize 50% of all transitions are not voluntary. Our work, Compass Point's work, is working with these clients to help them prepare for transition. But we're always thinking about, but what if? What if one of these things hit? Are we ready now to be able to transition on your terms and be able to harvest the wealth that you built into the business? Okay, next. So this is just a reminder, capture the wave. If any of you are old trigonometry fans and know the sine wave, this is very typical, by the way, of the economic cycles. If we have zero growth and the flat line going across horizontally, and you've got that curve up and down, the sine curve, the sine wave, we are, imagine us not at the top of one of those humps right now, up above the midline, but on our way up. So typically, prior to the early 2000s, about every 10 years, we were hitting a recession. So I got into the workforce in 1980. Reagan came in as president. We were just the beginning of a recession that ran till 83, came out. We had a good, robust 80s, went into the 90s early on. We had a big commercial real estate bust, went into recession again. And then we went to YK2. Some of you on here may remember that was the big buildup of all the computer systems are going to crash, and everybody was redoing their computers to make sure the date transferred to 2000. And then at the same time, we had the whole dot-com bubble burst. And so we went into a recession in 2000. And then, of course, we all remember the bam that we took in 2008 when the financial markets collapsed. And so all of a sudden, the recessionary period, condensed down to almost 5 to 7 years. And then the thought was, geez, and now are we into that cycle? But I know it hasn't felt like we've been in a nice economic growth boom by any means, but we have. Consider we came out of that recession in 9 or 10. We had growth right up until the pandemic hit, and there was anticipated to be. I remember being at the chamber luncheon with the Wells Fargo economist last year in January, saying, another 3 years of growth, unless something catastrophic were going to happen. By the way, COVID was already alive and well in Asia, and nobody could fathom that this was going to happen. So, but right now, hey, we're coming out, we're up on this wave, and for the foreseeable future, we ought to be in a pretty good position to. Thinking of growing and strategically growing your business, we when we're working with our clients, it's not just about top line, of course. It's about, we want to grow profitability and generate cash. We need the cash, the fuel to grow. But it's important that we're building value into the business. That a business that has value is transferable, either selling it to a third party or transitioning it to family or key employees in the business. But if it doesn't have any value, nobody wants it, right? So what are some of the drivers of value, those intrinsic characteristics of a business that you want to be thinking about strategically that's going to drive value? And I'll just pop through these really quick. And again, you can reach out to me afterwards or reach back through your Univest folks, and happy to have a conversation. But for 8 of them that stand out, one of them is financial performance. Obviously, we want to have a growing net income, or what we call EBITDA, and a consistent and growing top line as well. But you also want to have reliable numbers. So from a CPA standpoint, having at least a review of your financial statements all the way up to an audit builds credibility into your numbers. So they're not just your numbers, and they're believable to somebody else. Plus a good audit every once in a while, or at least a good compilation, getting your CPA to take a look at your books, make sure that you're not missing things that you may be missing. So then a growth potential, being in a market that has growth potential. Who wants a business where the market, there's no growth potential in it? So what's happening in your market? Is there an adjacent or new market that you need to be looking at? That's a significant value driver. Number 3, we call the Switzerland structure. That's essentially, if you know anything about Switzerland, they're the independent country. Are you independent from any single employee or any key vendor or any certain customer, where you have concentration in any one of those 3 that could really hurt you if you lost them? So making sure that you've got diversity there. Valuation teeter-totter just talks about cash. Is your business a cash suck, or is it a cash spigot? If every dollar to grow requires a dollar of investment, that's not a very good business. And so we want businesses that can start to scale and don't require huge cash inflows in order to do that, and businesses that are self-generating cash, and we don't have to go to outside resources. That's a valuable company. Just think of yourself as an investor, and you were going to buy a business. You'd want a business that's generating cash, not one that you have to keep dumping it in. Recurring revenue is a beautiful thing. Obviously, in the insurance industry, this is a key factor to driving value in those businesses. But quite frankly, every business has an opportunity to create recurring revenue. Takes time, takes some thinking, some strategy. But again, knowing that there's a certain amount of revenue we can pretty much count on for the year drives value in the business. Obviously, too, having any of these things in place makes it a much more fun business to run and an easier business to run. 6, monopoly control just talks about having a competitive advantage. If you're doing the same thing your competitors are, you're going to get caught into the price game. And unless you can be the low-cost provider, which pretty sure everybody on this call can't be, because we don't have the scale to be, you got to figure out what's your competitive, what's your unique and valuable position that's going to allow you to charge a premium. Doesn't mean it's the highest, but it's a premium. It's not the bottom of the market price where you can earn also an optimal profit. Second or the 7th one is customer satisfaction. Obvious, want to have good satisfied customers. People will actually pay for what's called the NPS score, the Net Promoter Score. There's some history behind it. I won't get into it, but the bottom line is we can get a score between 0 and 10 on how satisfied your customers are. And the closer it is to 10, and especially 9s and 10s, indicates how likely they are to refer or repeat. Who doesn't want more of those customers? And so being able to qualify that and quantify it is really important. And then hub and spoke speaks to, if the owner's the hub and everything has to come through spoke-wise to the owner to get done, that business is really difficult to scale. So these are really important drivers of value. And if you know anything about how a business is valued, it's typically a multiple, while it's a capitalization rate of earnings, but the typical language we hear is it's a multiple of EBITDA, that earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, amortization, sort of your net cash flow. Everybody knows about driving net profit and EBITDA, but the whole mystery is over here in the multiple. And quite frankly, driving these drivers is going to drive your multiple. And so to make some sense of that impact-wise, if you had a business that was generating $1 million of EBITDA and you had a multiple of 4, you have a 4 times $1 million, you have a $4 million fair market value business. If you increase that multiple to 5, you've got a $5 million business. Versus if you kept it at 4 and you had to increase the profitability of that business, you'd have to get it to 1.5. It's a lot harder to pick up $500,000 of new net profit versus improving your business performance to drive these value drivers. So it's a great thing to keep in mind as your driving strategy. Next. And so here's what we don't want to have happen. Again, I know not everybody on the call is an owner, but you work for one. So we don't want our owners to get caught in the owner's trap. What's the owner's trap? It's when the business slows down when you're away. And why does that happen? Because you're probably in that hub and spoke quandary where too much is happening because of you. Customers come to you when something goes wrong. Your revenue has reached its plateau because you're driving it all. So, and what happens when owners get caught in this trap, and then one of those 5 Ds happens, they're either going to have a very difficult time transitioning that business, or they're not going to get nearly the value out of it. So drive those drivers, have a clear plan of how you're growing your business, and you'll avoid this owner's trap. Next. And obviously, when we talk about strategy, we're talking about a game plan. You don't walk out to play a game and not have a plan. And, we work with businesses all the time who I hear, well, everything changes. We don't really see any sense in having a plan or taking the time to do one, or having, an 80-page document sit on a shelf. And I agree with that latter statement. Who wants one of those? No, it should be simple. It should be implementable. It should be practical. And it should describe where are we, where do we want to go, and what's the game plan to get there, and how do we measure it? And what's our rhythm for accountability to come back and look at how we're doing, right? So what are the priorities? What are the metrics? What's the targets that we're looking at? And what's going to be our rhythm of accountability to look back? How are we doing? Course correct next, right? Next quarter or the next 90 days, whatever your rhythm may be. But this is critical. You can't win a game if, number one, you don't know what the game is, right? And by the way, most of the people on this phone, you're not the ones that are going to win the game. You're a part of it, but it's the rest of your team that's going to help you win that game. So they got to understand, what's the game we're playing? What are the rules in that game? And what's the score? How do we keep score? What are those rules? And what's the current score? And how do we win? What's winning look like? Sounds pretty basic. We never play a game without asking those questions. What's the same thing in business? What's your game? What's your game plan? And making sure you're communicating this throughout the organization. Okay, next. So where do you start with those 7 attributes that I talked about earlier? The leadership, talent, strategy, execution, profit, customer, and systems. If you haven't read this book now, I'm going to guess from Jim Collins, is probably 12, 13, 14 years old now. This is just one of the Bibles of business books. So if you haven't read it, read it. It's a great book. It's a pleasurable read. Collins is just one of our great strategists in our era. And the interest, he's a big researcher. So this isn't just a bunch of ideas that Jim has. He's gone out and researched. And in this case, he researched businesses that went what he described as good to great. And they were all public companies, publicly traded, because that's where he could get data. It's hard to get it out of private businesses like us. But he could get data, and he could find out, kind of growth patterns, employee, numbers of employees, turnover, those kinds of metrics. And what Collins found of these companies that went from good, and good companies weren't schmucky companies. They were like a Procter and Gamble to being a great company like a 3M. What was the difference? And in the end, the number one factor was the great companies figured out who first and then what. Who first, then what. I remember when I read that, I was like, oh man, that's just such consulting BS. I mean, who could ever go out and get the right team first and then figure out what to do? Well, after doing this for 20 years, after working with hundreds of family businesses, after having run a couple of businesses, a couple of manufacturing companies, I completely get it. It is completely about who first and then what. And getting the right who is not as difficult as you might think. So I'm going to give you some hints here that or some tools that may be helpful. So next slide. So it starts with core values. We typically hire people for what they can do, and we fire them for who they are. We hire them for what they can do. We fire them for who they are. What is it about who they are that finally breaks the camel's back? It's generally a breakdown in core values. Whether you've articulated them as a company or not, somebody at some point has crossed a line, I'm going to say it's a core value line, where you just finally said, that's it. I'm not tolerating it anymore. It's very rare that we let somebody go because they're not competent. And it does happen sometimes, but it's generally because of who they are. So what are core values? Well, you have them as a company, whether you've articulated them or not. They're this handful of rules, this set of behaviors that you have as a company. And the key, like this helix diagram of the DNA, is they're constant, right? You don't have a set of core values today and another set tomorrow. This is who we are. And when people know they can count on a company to live to its core values, they've got a base to work from, right? So when everything hits the fan, they know, but we're still rock solid around this. I know my boss got my back because these are our core values. I know to make a decision right now that won't burn up my company. I might not make the right decision, but I'm going to make the best one I can because I understand our core values and I know who we are. I'm going to make the best decision I can make. So a handful of rules that remain constant. Next slide. And to test these core values, you'd be willing to fire somebody that consistently broke your core values. Might not fire them right away. And of course, you got to articulate them. And it's not just the poster on the wall. It's making them real, catching people living your core values, articulating those core values, probably a poster and other ways. We've got one client down in Texas. Texas is full of Air Force bases, and they put their core values on a dog tag. Now, they don't make everybody wear the dog tag, but they sang it in their cubicle or whatever. But it's a clever way of saying, this is who we are. This is the behavior we are. And we'd fire you if you break these. We'd take a financial hit. If we got to let you go and it's a financial hit, we're going to do it. And here's the key. They have to be alive among your people today. You can't go to your team and go, these are our core values. And they look at you and go, what are you talking about? Like, that's not who we are. Because they'll catch that hypocrisy in a second and you're toast. Anything else that comes out of your mouth is going nowhere. So you'd fire an offender, you take a financial hit, they're alive among your people today. Next. So I think most of you on the call are somewhat regional. And this is a nonprofit. So I said we work almost with all family businesses. But this happens to be one that we're also supporting because what they needed was a lot of strategy work and succession, both of which we do in our family business work. Here's their core values. Be fiercely committed to getting the job done. If any of you have been up at ArtsQuest, ArtsQuest is an arts and entertainment center in the Lehigh Valley on the old Bethlehem Steel site. They do a number of educational programming, a lot of hands-on art, obviously a lot of music and concerts. They've got a very small staff, and man, if you're going to work there, you have to be fiercely, not just committed, fiercely committed to getting the job done. If you're caught going, that's not my job, you won't last there. You just won't last. And it probably won't be the boss who lets you go. It's so strong. These values are so strong among the teammates And that's the best kind, of course, when the team starts holding each other accountable, that they'll probably ferret you out of the business, out of the organization. Act with transparency. So no hiding. We got to move quick. We got so much to do. No secrets. Let's act with transparency. Find the solution. If any of you have been to Music Fest, they bring in over 1 million people for a 10-day party in Bethlehem with all sorts of shenanigans and challenges. And man, they need people that find solutions, just don't come and report the problem. Be selfless. It's not about you, it's about being selfless. That's how you're going to be part of our team. Always be curious. I love that value. Always be curious, looking for what's the next opportunity? How else could we improve this? How did our customers respond? What did they like? What did they not like? By the way, some of the best information you can get from your customers, if you can get them to tell you what they hate about doing business or company, go, oh, fix that. That's gold for a business. And then another core value there is just have fun. While we're doing all this, let's have fun. So let me show you how to use these. Next slide. This is what we call the player grid. And these are fictitious names. These are not names from ArtsQuest. But we use this grid, and it's a great way to, it's always hard, like, well, she's pretty good, but I'm really frustrated about this, or they don't do this, or you just know they're the wrong person, and it's that hard conversation, and people don't know how to have it. And so here's a great, what we call the player grid: 4 quadrants, core values on the vertical axis, on the y-axis here, 0% at the bottom, 100% at the top. Don't worry about that it's incremental. Either are not aligned to the core values, or you're aligned to the core values. And at the bottom, in the horizontal axis, the x-axis is the productivity, and again, 0% to the left, 100% to the right. Either you're productive, you're not productive, or you are productive. So in this category, our A players are who's productive and who's aligned to our core values, right? They're the right who, and they're productive. They're getting their job done. They're doing what we're paying them for. B players over in the upper left are the right who, but they're not quite getting the work done. What do you think might be going on there? So it could be new, right? Could just be a new person. They haven't been trained yet to get over to be an A player. Or you might have somebody in the wrong seat. Yeah, that you get them into the right seat, and now they are productive. And you might just have somebody that doesn't get it, and then you have to make a new decision. But you understand what you've got. And when you got a B player, what's your job? Coach them. Coach them to move over to be an A player. Obviously, you want a whole organization of A's. Probably not going to happen. But we definitely want to take care of a few of these players and not have them at all. I'll talk about that in a second. But it's always in flux, right? Things like I said, you get out of bed and you went to bed, and then finally everything settled down, and boom, now we come up and things happen to people, and they can show up differently. So anyway, we're always coaching, and we're trying to coach those B players to be A players. C players, we made a mistake. We hired the wrong person. They're the wrong who. So we didn't do a good job in the interviewing process. We didn't have good behavioral-based questions to understand if they're aligned and actually live values that we say are important. By the way, I don't mean it like a cult. There's no right or wrong values. They're just yours. So whatever they are, the more clear you are on them, and then hiring people to them, you're going to start building this strong team. Because if you've got a team aligned around a common set of values, believe in the purpose of the business, why we're in this business, and believe in the vision of where you're trying to take it, you got a really good shot of growing that business. So C players, wrong who, and they're not productive. Get rid of C players. You made a mistake. Free up their future. Do it right. Keep your core values. Get them out of the organization. And then B, C players over in the bottom right are probably the most dangerous person in the organization. They're the cancers in the organization. They're incredibly productive, but they're eating your culture daily. And there's an old adage out there, culture eats strategy's lunch every day. Bad culture, I don't care how good your strategy is, it'll eat it up. People will leave. What will A players do if C's and BC's are tolerated? They won't become a BC or a C, they're just going to leave. And by the way, A players, you can't just leave them alone. They're A players because they're great at what they do. They want to be engaged, they want to be challenged, they want to be pushed, they want to be noticed. So we got to pay attention to them to keep them. but we got to take care of this bottom rung stuff. Get rid of the C's. And a BC player, I say, is like, they need a good crack across the head and go, listen, you're nailing it productivity wise, but you're killing me culturally. And I'm not going to tolerate it. Do you know when you say this, how the team reacts? Do you know when you do this, what's happening internally? There may be some self-awareness problems that you need to help bring to light. Some point, BC player doesn't clean up their act, they got to go because they're going to kill your company. Okay, next. And here's a neat little tool. Again, you're going to get the slide deck that my son actually shared this with me from a business that he was working with. And I love this. This is such a great coaching tool. It's a tool that comes out of professional sports. And the idea is this success triangle. So when you're coaching somebody, let's say that B player, you're coaching them. You want to have a mental map of this triangle, and you've got 3 points to the triangle. Are you clear on what you're supposed to do? Are you clear on the goals? Are you clear on my expectations? And are we in agreement? Doesn't do any good to have an expectation of somebody and not get agreement with them that, okay, I'm in agreement, that's what I'm going to do. And do they understand the plays? Are you clear? This clarity is a key question, and you've got to keep going back to it because people get off the rails, or we make new decisions and we forget to bring people along, and all sorts of reasons for things to fall apart. So when you see somebody not performing well, start with clarity. Are you clear? Next, are you capable? Do you have the skills? Do you have the talent? How do I need to help you? Where can I coach you? What kind of training might you need? So is there clarity? Are they capable? And then finally, are you motivated? What's going on? What's up with your attitude? What's up with your behavior that you're not bringing your game every day? And, it could be things like, I don't think I'm being paid fairly. I think I think the boss came down on me, wrong. He called me out in front of everybody, or I can't stand working with this person. Or I don't know, whatever it is, get to it. Figure out how you can help clear that off the deck and get them motivated. This is such a great coaching tool. Clear, capable, motivated. You keep working this triangle with somebody. I call it walking around the barn. Just keep walking around the barn with them. This is a great way to coach. It's practical. It's simple. You can keep this mental map when you're working with people and keep them as A players. Get your B players to be A's. Get rid of your C's. This is also really key with your BCs. Okay, next. I think that's it. So I am now at this point going to hand over to Greg, and I'll be around afterwards if you have any Q&A for me. Thank you.
Tom, thanks so much. Just fantastic content. I know that we were excited when Tom agreed to participate with us today. I think the content and what he's talking about couldn't be more spot on given our timing. And I think, the things we've been through, and hopefully the period that we're getting to, we here at Univest talk about, 2020 being kind of that strange year that most of us, none of us have ever encountered, its impact on our business and also socially, personally, professionally. And then this year being in a lot of ways a transition year, whatever we do, a transition personally, I know recently we got together with my in-laws for the first time in probably almost a year. They had been vaccinated recently, were 2 weeks out from their second dose, and it was like a celebration. It felt like a holiday. And I'm sure many of you are feeling the same way, and business-wise too, very similar. And then we're hoping that 22, you've heard terms like new normal, I've heard next normal, and hopefully that gets us back to more of a situation that we had pre-pandemic in the years that led up to it. Also admitting that we're probably going to be living with a lot of the things that have come of this, for a long time. So Reggie, if you want to hit the next slide. I only have 2 slides here today. Reggie and I are bolting onto the back of Tom's presentation because we felt like when we looked at Tom's presentation, we felt like, wow, he's talking about a lot of the stuff that we are talking to those of you that are clients on this call that we're talking to you about, and our prospective clients and our internal and external partners here at Univest. So I just did a couple of quick slides, really just kind of taking the ball from what Tom did and looking 2 slides, one being from, protecting growth, the title of his presentation, and just taking it to a strategic insurance planning kind of an area from the employee perspective, and then also from the employer perspective. And Tom talked about a lot of these things. And when he talked about those 7 attributes of agile growth, strategy and talent are huge, right? And he went into the importance of talent and having the right talent and identifying A, B, and C players. Never been more important. We hear all the time from companies that their most important asset is their people, right? How do we attract and retain key employees? How do you get employees to stay? There's a statistic kicking around out there that 30% of employees in their current employment will start to look for new employment as the kind of the constraints of the pandemic lifts. And a lot of that is, I think, the way that they perceive their company handling them and the business and their needs throughout the pandemic, leading to the fact that burnout is real, right? And those of you on the call that are dealing with your employees' burnout, what's the HR plan to combat it? We've had a lot of communication and discussions with our clients around that. Again, 30% say they'll look to move post-pandemic. That's a big number. There are numbers out there that say 1 in 4 of employees are feeling depressed, not just lonely. The lonely number is about half of employees relative to the isolation that a lot of them have endured over the last year. And these are all real things, right? These are things that a lot of employers, most, have not encountered. We've always talked about wellness and mental health within your insurance plan, but this last year has really presented some more specific challenges. So what do you offer? What do employees want? All right, that might be different. Even pre-pandemic, this concept of tuition repayment was a big one. And I'm just going to run through a lot of this stuff so we can get going. It's almost 10 of, and Reggie has a couple slides. Telemedicine. We've had a number of meetings. It's amazing the breakpoints where telemedicine is. For the first time ever, we've got 5 generations of people in the workforce through our 20 and 21 and 22-year-old Generation Zs, all the way up, through some of our pre-retirees. The way that you communicate with those people, you need 5 different communication styles in many settings, depending on industry and how your people interact. Flexible schedules. People now don't just want to work remotely, they want to work remotely different hours. What if somebody wants to work non-traditional hours, but they get the work done? If you're one of the latter generations, that might not be the way you worked, and that might not be the way that you succeeded on your way up in the role that you have. You have to adapt, and you have to be able to recognize talent. And as Tom talked about, be able to understand that you hired someone to do the job and bring their talents to the job and let them do that. And that might be working from a mountain in a different country remotely. And that might not have been something you thought about 5 or 10 years ago or a year ago. Next slide, Reg, if you don't mind. From an employer perspective, all of the things I just talked about are things that you will do and that you will consider if you think they are protecting the bottom line. Of course, it's important. You want your people to be happy and engaged, but without a bottom line, and Tom talked about the number of companies that are successful as they achieve certain, growth numbers. I say this a lot, if you don't have a company, if a company doesn't succeed, then it's hard to have a culture and have people that work at that company, right? What's the long-term plan? I'll skip long haulers for a minute. What's the long-term plan 3, 4, 5 years out to build that strong company that Tom referenced, right? The average profit margin that we see in our client base is about 10%. So that would mean very quickly, if you have $1 million insurance premium, over 3 to 5 years, we in the industry see that doubling. That's about the time it takes for an insurance premium or insurance cost, your total spend, to double. At a 10% profit margin, you would need to generate an additional $10 million to cover that $1 million of added expense over 3 to 5 years. So you need a plan for that, right? I think everyone understands that. So add on top of that, the fact that 2020 was a year where utilization and claims were way down, and not just single digit percentage down. Some cases 20, 30, 40% relative to cancer screenings, mammographies, colonoscopies, important types of screenings that keep your people healthy, that keep your company strong. And then on top of that, the people that had COVID, the long haul symptoms and the impact that those people who will be out of work next year, the year after, things we didn't think about last year pre-pandemic. These are all things that are going to affect the growth of your business and the prosperity of it. You got to be open to cutting edge ideas. We have conversations all the time. We are being pushed constantly by our clients around what type of ideas are out there relative to funding their insurance benefits. If I'm getting very specific, right? Fully insured, self-funded, all the different things you can do there. Do I go into a consortium? Do I go into a captive? Do I self-fund? Do I look at reference-based pricing where you're not using a carrier? That may sound crazy. These are all things, and I know I'm going fast, but I want to get through this. I know you may have questions that you want to type into the chat. We want to get to Reggie's slides. Univest is here to help you kind of get through that. We're very excited to be part of Tom's presentation today. We're very thankful for that. If you have any questions, obviously you can type them into the chat box. We're here to help. And with that, I will quickly and pass it along to Reggie. Reggie is our Senior Vice President. He's our Commercial Lines Team Leader, and he's going to talk to you for a few minutes today. Reg?
Thanks, Greg. So I will be cautious with time here. I know we're coming up right against it. And like Greg said, if you have any questions, please put those into the Q&A box and we'll address those at the very end. So from my perspective, from the business insurance perspective, certainly as you're growing your business and as you're preparing for this post-pandemic world, your growth plans should be in total rhythm with your insurance strategy. And it's a really important piece to consider when we get into that business and corporate risk perspective. I broke this down into two sections, and I'm going to move fast, but I wanted to first call out the insurance philosophy piece of things and then get into a couple of the more tactical real world examples of as we're getting back to work, as we're getting back to the next normal, as Greg said, how to get that mindset ready for that. So the first thing, your insurance philosophy is the core foundation of your insurance relationship from a property and casualty side, from a business insurance side. The first bullet, insurance is not your enemy. We are not out to gouge you for price. We want the same things for our clients. We want to keep your employees safe. We want to help your top line. We want to help your bottom line, and we want to insulate you. We want to be that protective membrane around your operations and around your growth or your constriction or whatever you're doing from an operational standpoint. And we want to run in tandem with you no matter what happens. It starts with communication. You know, when you're working with your broker, it's not a time to be stoic. Let us know what to punch at, and we will definitely do our best to meet your needs. So openly communicate your expectations of us as a broker. Openly communicate what you need and want. So that way, when we come to the table, we are hopefully addressing those needs and wants very, very specifically. You have to partner with the right broker. It's important as you're moving along and as you're growing, you may outgrow your original broker. He's a great guy. She's a great woman. You're friends with them. But at a certain point, you're going to need different tools and capabilities to take that next step. And trust, non-negotiable, needs to be an absolute in any relationship with your insurance broker. And then keep those capabilities in mind. What are some of the services like Univest Insurance? You know, in our commercial lines team, we have a dedicated loss control and safety team. We have dedicated in-house claims management. It's a much different service than a lot of one or two people shops could provide from an insurance perspective. And then finally, wrapping it all up, play the long game. Don't be victim to looking at this myopically within the lines of your effective date and your expiration date. That's a transactional look at insurance. For any business owner on the line, approach your agent with and expect a 5-year look at preparing and planning for your insurance needs over that time. We want to solve for today, but we also want to solve for what's coming down the road 5 years from now. So getting into the tactical considerations, I'm going to move quick again. I'll call out what I think are the most important items here within each section. With the employees returning to the workplace, it's pretty obvious now with the CDC guidelines, with the state guidelines, you're going to want to keep up on those. And the reason why this is really important is OSHA is doubling down on making sure and enforcing and legislating this. So you're going to want to make sure that you are up on all of the safety guidelines, one from a safety perspective of your people, but two, to be compliant with a much more aggressive OSHA under the Biden administration. And then the last point I think is worth calling out, Tom mentioned this, I will mention this as well. Make sure your leadership team is trained to recognize the signs of mental stress of your employees. COVID has done a number on all of us, and our employees are our number one asset. We want to make sure that they're physically healthy, but we also want to make sure that they're mentally healthy as well. So if you don't have a defined support system, some sort of employee assistance program, now might be the time to look into either having it in-house or actually outsourcing it to a third-party vendor. Flexible work arrangements, they're fantastic ways to retain talent. They're fantastic ways to keep your employees happy. That they bring up a myriad of different challenges from an insurance standpoint. The two I'll call out, cyber attacks have doubled in frequency during the pandemic. Bad people will do bad things. Bad people are also very opportunistic. And they saw this weakness come up within the infrastructure, this work from home arrangement, and they have certainly taken advantage of this. So from your perspective as business owners, make sure your employees are all trained. They know how to identify certain malicious content and stop it right out front. Review your security protocols, either your in-house IT team or through your third party that you're using to manage that. Make sure your security protocols are adapting to the new challenges. And then finally, pressure test your systems. We work with a firm out of New York City that has the capabilities for a fee to basically go in and hack your systems and identify your weak points, identify the areas that could be corrupted and compromised. So pressure test your current systems, get feedback from an outside IT professional on what areas need to be improved, and see what you can do to make those improvements. I'll call out the third bullet point too, which is working with your HR team or outside legal professional to ensure you have a non-discriminatory work from home protocol. So if you go live long-term with a work from home plan for your staff, you have protected classes of business in your organization. You have different life situations. There's a lot to contemplate other than just John is in this day, Jane is in this day. You've got to be very, very cautious with this and make sure that you are looking at this strategically as a whole. We definitely are seeing an increase on the employment practices liability side of wrongful termination claims, discrimination claims. So you absolutely want to have this plan in lockstep with your line leadership team that is out deploying the plan. And then finally, protecting your operational expansions or your contractions. Growth can happen by growing traditionally, or it can also happen by addition by subtraction, right? And each of them presents unique challenges on the business insurance side. Communicate any operational changes to your broker as soon as humanly possible. Don't wait till the last minute. What I would suggest is during the planning phase, that if you're thinking about opening up a new product line or moving to a different geography or doing a mass hiring, a mass RIF, make sure that you are letting your insurance agent know ahead of time. Give us time to prepare and make sure that your policy is in lockstep with where your strategy is going. Proper coverages are in place for like your physical property additions, any sort of major renovations that you're doing, or any geographical expansions. This kind of bolts onto that last point, but these are things that kind of get lost in the minutia of the day-to-day. But these are important things, and they have provisions and they have implications on your insurance policy. So my suggestion would be just let us know of any operational change throughout the process. You should be hopefully communicating with your agent more than a few times a year to keep up on this plan. Ensure your tight compliance. If there is an RIF, if you're planning this, ensure tight compliance around this. I mentioned before, there's been a lot more claims come through on the EPLI side for wrongful termination. There's more sensitivity to this in the current environment. Make sure you are totally locked up with your plan, with your legal department, with your HR team, and then also with your leadership team. And then finally, driver safety training. The challenge right now, and this is not just for fleet businesses or trucking companies, anybody who has employees driving vehicles on the company's behalf, a lot of times we take this driver training for granted. And the challenge is that we don't have enough drivers out there and they're not properly trained. And it's a very distressed line of business within the industry. Take that initial and that extra step of ensuring they have proper training, and then utilize the technology piece, the dash cam, the telematics, to support specific training for affected individuals that may need just that extra bit to stay compliant, to help keep your rates down, to help keep your accidents at a minimum, and keep themselves physically healthy. So that wraps it up for our time today with everyone. We're right about 2 o'clock. If you still have any questions, we actually don't have any questions here in the Q&A box, We'll hang on here for a few more minutes. If you have any questions or need clarity, please feel free to submit those in through that Q&A box.
Your clients can reach back through you guys, and you can connect with me, and happy to continue the conversation.
Tom, thank you for your time, and thank everybody for joining us today. Have an excellent afternoon.